This video was brought to you by Squarespace. Is there something missing in your life? A hole that you cannot fill? Well, I really hope that missing something just happens to be a website, because if it is, then boy have I got great news for you. Squarespace is the easiest way to build a site. You don't need any experience, any coding knowledge, nothing. Just an idea. From there, you can build just about anything you need using Squarespace's intuitive editor. You can even start with a template to cut down on the work. Doesn't matter if it's a storefront or an info page or a blog or just some place to host your digital content. Formatting and embedding and tweaking is all super simple. My site, Arlo Recommends, is a simple blog, so I can just create a bunch of content, schedule everything to automatically publish and generate social media posts, then sit back and watch the analytics. And if I ever need more, I can tap into Squarespace's many powerful extensions. To try out Squarespace for yourself, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. Then when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/Arlo to save 10% off your first website or domain. And now, for today's recommendation, Locust Toy Box. All these years, I had no idea that David Firth of Salad Fingers fame does music, and all I can say is that it's incredible. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like weird, experimental, electronic music. I don't know. It's great. Stringland was what pulled me in, so that's a great album to start with. Thanks again to Squarespace. Unfortunately, nothing will fill the hole inside of me, besides starting the video. Diamondo. The launch of the Switch feels so fresh in my mind that sometimes it's genuinely hard to believe that it is now slipping into the realm of nostalgic yesteryear. I mean, it's been 8 years at the time of this recording. Won't be long at all before a whole stinking decade will have passed before our eyes. Yet all the lead up and the hype and the launch, it all practically feels like yesterday. And I think a lot of it comes down to just how substantial and important that first year was. The Switch deserves to go down in history as a textbook case of the perfect console launch. The best first year of a console's life that anyone could ever wish for. In a vacuum, this would have been cool enough, but coming off the Wii U generation, this was seen as a rather dramatic turnaround for Nintendo. This wasn't just the launch of a cool new console, it was the launch of the perfect new Nintendo console, and a sign that the dark age was over and Nintendo was rising from the ashes to be born anew. So here, at the end of the Switch's life, I want to look back at that first mythical year and relive some of those early moments. And of course, it all started in January 2017 with a legendary presentation. By this point, Nintendo had pretty much ditched stage shows in favor of completely pre-recorded presentations. But for whatever reason, they got up on that stage anyway, and they even delivered some of that classic live show awkwardness we all love.
Splatoon 2.
Nintendo is big on nostalgia, aren't they? The reveal presentation gave us all the finer details on Switch, and I would say this was a rare case of basically all the news being good news. The launch was soon. The price was totally reasonable. The thing was region-free. It charged using USB-C instead of some proprietary cable. That was huge. They told us everything we wanted to hear. Then, obviously, there were the games. I really don't know if Nintendo has ever announced more games all at once than they did during that presentation. The reveal of Super Mario Odyssey promised the return to open sandbox environments and showed off all these bizarre and creative locales. So, personally, that was a bombshell and even more evidence that Nintendo was really cooking with this new system. And beyond that, we got reveals and announcements for Splatoon 2, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, a port of Mario Kart 8, Fire Emblem Warriors, also 1-2 Switch and ARMS, and I'll admit, even back in 2017, the whole motion control thing already felt kinda old hat. So I wasn't personally excited, but those were still 2 brand new game reveals. Then third parties announced Shin Megami Tensei 5, Octopath Traveler, a new No More Heroes, Skyrim, and the whole thing was capped off by a new trailer for Breath of the Wild that, it made it look like it was going to be, without a doubt, the biggest and coolest Nintendo game ever released. That is what that trailer conveyed to me. We were already very excited about the Switch. The concept alone was enough to sell plenty of people, myself included. But the January 2017 Switch presentation communicated before the system even hit store shelves that this new Nintendo had a heck of a lot to offer. Going into the generation, we knew that there would be no lack of stuff to play for the foreseeable future. So it goes without saying that the actual launch day was a pretty big deal. The Switch dropped simultaneously worldwide, and the excitement was palpable. No stores had Wiis to sell when it launched, and nobody but me cared about the Wii U when it launched. So this was the first Nintendo console launch experience I got to really enjoy, really experience with other fans. Most of the stores in my town didn't do midnight launches. I didn't get to go to one, but there were lines out the door of every retailer. Hundreds of folks just like me, pleased as punch to get their hands on this magical new piece of hardware. It was a real event. I had several friends who previously had little to no interest in Nintendo, and they were all there with me, picking up their Switches on day one. I could already tell this was the beginning of something special. And speaking of launch day, I really don't think any other Nintendo system can hold a candle to Switch when it comes to launch and year one titles. You want to talk about launch games, you can't ask for something better than Zelda, especially a series redefining title like Breath of the Wild. I mean, the previous two Nintendo systems launched with, in my eyes, no single unmissable piece of software, and it took a long time for those libraries to fill out. But Zelda, this Zelda, on day one, that was the kind of game I could play all by itself for months. But Nintendo did not give me any time to rest. Year one of Switch was notable because of how constant the releases were. Not consistent, constant. There were hardly any gaps in the schedule, not so much as a whiff of drought in the air. The thing launched, then the next month they gave us Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. The Wii U's failure was a blessing in disguise for Nintendo because porting its games helped fill out an already impressive early library. Now, in addition to the biggest Zelda ever, we had a Mario Kart that most people hadn't even played yet, so it was practically as good as a brand new one. And this was a multiplayer game, so it had everyone trying out split Joy-Con mode and urging their friends to pick up Switches so they could system link. I'm not even a huge Mario Kart fan, but the launch was nevertheless quite the event for me and my friends. And still, the games did not stop. In June, it was ARMS. In July, it was Splatoon 2, which sparked another huge thing where suddenly everyone was playing it. We were all trying to get together for multiplayer. Again, the first game was on Wii U, so not as many people got to play it. But now the series felt like this fresh new thing all over again. It was finding an even bigger audience, becoming something downright popular. At this point, around the launch of Splatoon 2, I distinctly remember feeling like Christmas would never end. It had been only 4 months since the Switch's launch, and we were now inundated with stuff to play. All anyone wanted to do was play the Switch and talk about the Switch. I don't think it had ever felt quite so exciting to be a Nintendo fan. Those first months were just fire. They were a non-stop buffet. And still, the servers simply would not stop bringing out fresh trays. Only 1 month later, Ubisoft gave us Mario & Rabbids Kingdom Battle, a completely out-of-the-blue crossover that no one asked for, yet turned out to be an immensely enjoyable tactics game and a solid example of a Mario RPG-ish adventure during a time when Nintendo was kind of shying away from those. Then September, Pokken Tournament DX, another Wii U port. Then, for whatever reason, Nintendo decided to release 2 games in October, because I guess they just had that many games for us. Fire Emblem Warriors, then Super Mario Odyssey only a week later, and then Xenoblade Chronicles 2 at the beginning of December just to cap off the year. Honestly, by the end of 2017, it kind of just felt like one big flex from Nintendo. They had clearly sold their souls or saved a wizard disguised as a frog or something, because they now had the ability to release games at a pace once thought impossible. The Switch launched with a huge game, then kept delivering games all the way up to the end of the year and the launch of the biggest Mario ever and a massive RPG. Even for a pickier player like me, there was always something to play. The first year offered something for just about everybody. And you know what? That's not even the first whole year. If you want to look at the entire first 365 days of the Switch's life, fudging by just a couple weeks to make this list that much more impressive, add Bayonetta 2 and Kirby Star Allies on there, meaning that during the Switch's first year, plus like 2 weeks, only counting Nintendo IPs and exclusives, we got Breath of the Wild, 1-2 Switch, Snipper Clips, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, ARMS, Splatoon 2, Mario & Rabbids, Pokken Tournament, Fire Emblem Warriors, Mario Odyssey, Xenoblade 2, Bayonetta 2, and Kirby Star Allies. That is an obscene amount of video game to play, representing a huge chunk of Nintendo's famous IPs. And all of this was playable both on the TV and in handheld mode, which at the time was still incredibly novel and made everything just that much more fun. All these games to play, and somehow playing them was more enjoyable than ever. Oh, but when it comes to video games, hype is not limited to the playing of the games. There are also the times when we get to be hyped about the mere existence of the games. And in this department, we were similarly spoiled in the year of 2017. Nintendo didn't want us to think that this amazing first year was naught but a fluke. A bait and switch, if you will. No, this new era of Nintendo, with all its exciting game releases, was all the more exciting thanks to the promise of future releases. The April and September Nintendo Directs really just covered previously announced Switch games and 3DS games, but nothing could have prepared me for the E3 2017 presentation. Nothing. We had just spent years slogging through the dark Wii U days, where the releases were sparse and oft disappointing. And even when Nintendo had good games to share, their directs tended to feel extremely long and boring, padded with titles that were so hard to care about. I was still used to those kinds of directs. Plus, Nintendo had announced so many games during the January presentation, and there were already so many games on the schedule. What else could they possibly have to show? The answer, it seemed, was a lot. In addition to huge reveal trailers for previously announced games, including a Mario Odyssey trailer revealing the game's big hook and sending the hype train into overdrive, Nintendo announced a new Kirby game, a new Yoshi game, the first chunk of Breath of the Wild DLC, and yeah, that was when they teased Metroid Prime 4. I've spent plenty of time discussing the significance of this game, what the announcement represented, what it meant not just for the series, but for Nintendo themselves, so I'll spare you. But I will say that this was another big moment for me. Perhaps the biggest moment. By the end of that E3 presentation, I can say that that was the new peak. This new system, Nintendo's explosive return to relevance, all these games releasing faster than I could play them. This promise of even more games, among them one game that I never thought would happen. One of my absolute biggest gaming-related wishes coming true. I don't know if anything can ever top that moment. Even with Switch going strong and Switch 2 on the horizon, even if Nintendo continues to dominate, bringing just game after game after incredible game, I don't know if the stars will ever align quite like they did in June 2017. It was the single most concentrated amount of pure hype I have ever experienced, and I just don't know if it'll ever be topped. I don't even know if it's possible for Nintendo to top it. And it's really indicative of the state of Nintendo at that time. I hesitate to call it lightning in a bottle because they've somehow succeeded in more or less keeping up that momentum for close to a decade, but there's no doubt that they made an unusually huge splash in 2017. The first year of the Switch's life, it truly does represent the company at its peak, the Nintendo experience at its peak. I'll say it again, I just don't think you can ever really expect a first year of any system to be quite that good. It felt like a literal dream come true. It was unrealistically perfect, and it set the stage for one heck of a console generation. The Switch has become Nintendo's most successful console ever by a wide margin. They're more relevant than they've been in decades, and it all started with that first year, when they needed a win, perhaps more than they ever had in over 100 years of the company's history, and they stepped up to bat and didn't knock it out of the park. They sent that thing to the moon. Yep, it really does feel like yesterday. And to think, as I say these words, we are on the cusp of something big. Sometime this year, we will have our hands on it at last. We will finally get to play Metroid Prime 4! It's been such a long 8 years!